The first time anyone found the house, it was already half swallowed by the woods. The roof sagged like a broken spine, and the chimney leaned against the branches of an oak that had grown through the porch. On a summer morning in 1972, a county surveyor brushed away a curtain of vines and noticed a faint carving above the doorway. W. Hollis, 1938. The name was barely legible, etched into rotting wood that smelled of mildew and time. Inside, the air was still, thick with the sweet, nauseating scent of decay and wet earth. On the mantel sat a photograph, warped by moisture. 5 figures, 3 children, 2 adults, stood before a white farmhouse. Their eyes were black pits of shadow, faces ghostly pale from the camera's flash. Behind them, the Virginia hills stretched endlessly, a patchwork of mist and dying cornfields. The man's arm rested stiffly on the woman's shoulder, but their closeness looked wrong, like 2 strangers forced into a pose they didn't understand. The smallest child held a doll by its leg. Its porcelain face was cracked, one eye missing. The surveyor said later he couldn't stay inside for more than 5 minutes. He claimed he heard whispering, faint, broken words, the kind that make you turn to see if someone's behind you. But there was only dust, hanging in golden shafts of light. When he took the photograph to the county office, no one could find a record of the Hollis family. No births, no deaths, no property deeds. Just the carved name and the year, 1938. Weeks later, an old woman from the nearby town of Saltville came forward. She said she remembered them, or thought she did. They weren't right, she whispered. Stayed up in those hills, kept to themselves. Folks said there was something wrong with the blood. The officials dismissed it as mountain gossip, but in the small towns that dot western Virginia, people still tell the story. About the family who lived and died in silence. About the curse that followed their name, and about the photograph. The one that no one dares to touch anymore. But who were the Hollises really? And why did their shame become a legend that the hills still whisper about? By the 1950s, the story of the Hollis family had become a whisper shared around campfires and porches. Half memory, half ghost story. Children dared each other to hike up to the ridge where the house was said to stand. They always turned back before reaching it. Locals claimed you could hear strange cries echoing from that hollow on still nights. Not animal, not human, just something in between. But it wasn't until 1956 that anyone spoke openly about the Hollis curse. That summer, a drifter named Clyde Barker came through town, working odd jobs. He claimed to have slept in the old Hollis cabin one stormy night. He said he'd found the remains of 3 graves behind the house, each marked only by wooden crosses carved with initials, EHCHRH. He told the men at the bar that the crosses had been clawed up, torn from the ground as if something had tried to dig them out. When the sheriff investigated, he found the graves, but no bones, no remains, just disturbed soil and a single broken locket half buried in the dirt. Inside was a photograph so faded it was almost gone. A man and a young woman. Their faces close, too close. Word spread fast. Some said Warren and Etta weren't just siblings, they were twins. Others swore the children were born from that blood, kept hidden from the world as their deformities grew more visible. A traveling midwife, long since dead, was rumored to have delivered one of Etta's babies and sworn never to speak of what she saw. Yet, the line between truth and tale blurred with each retelling. People needed their monsters. The Hollises became a warning, a name whispered to keep children from wandering too deep into the woods. But even legends leave traces of fact. County birth records from 1937 listed a stillborn child to a Mrs. E. Hollis. No husband listed, no doctor's signature, just the midwife's mark, an X beside her name. The sheriff sealed the photograph and locket in evidence, but both vanished from the county archives a year later. No one admitted to moving them, and to this day no one knows who took them, or why. In 1963, a group of teenagers from Saltville dared each other to find the Hollis house. They brought flashlights, whiskey, and the kind of fearlessness that only comes before you understand what time can do to a place. They reached the property at dusk, the woods thick and silent, the air heavy with the scent of rain and rot. The house still stood, barely. The porch sagged inward, the windows gaping like missing eyes. One of them, a boy named Mark Henson, stepped inside first. He later told police he felt the floor breathe. As they explored, they found remnants of life, a tin wash basin, a rusted stove, an old Bible missing its cover. Inside that Bible, between the pages of Psalms and Lamentations, was a folded letter, brittle with age. The ink had bled, but the words were legible enough to change the way people remembered the Hollises forever. They told us we were wrong in God's eyes. But what does God know of loneliness? The hills keep our secret now, and the blood we share, it binds us, not curses us. I only fear what he will do to the children if they ever find out. No signature, but written in a trembling hand at the bottom was a name, Etta. The sheriff who received the letter ordered it sealed and stored, claiming it was nothing but a cruel prank. But people whispered that he burned it himself after reading it aloud once in private. His wife found him sitting on the porch that night, staring into the woods, muttering, "She thought it was love, she thought it was love." For years after, the story changed again. The Hollises were no longer seen as victims of madness, but of something worse, devotion twisted into sin. Families in town stopped using the name Etta for their daughters. Children were warned that love could rot if left unspoken too long. And yet, some who lived closest to those woods insisted the letter was misunderstood. She was protecting her children, said one elderly woman. Not confessing, protecting. Still, no one could explain the voices people claimed to hear at night near the Hollis place. Soft, overlapping, and always ending in a child's cry. But were they echoes of the living, or the ones buried beneath their own home? In 1979, nearly a decade after the surveyor rediscovered the Hollis house, the faded photograph found on its mantel was finally examined by a historian named Dr. Miriam Lowe from the University of Virginia. She specialized in Appalachian folklore, but had a passion for the blurred space between myth and record. And something about that photograph unsettled her. Under infrared light, the image revealed something that the naked eye had missed. Behind the 5 figures, half concealed in shadow, was the faint outline of a 6th, smaller, thinner, almost transparent. The shape of a child. Its eyes seemed to glow faintly in the restoration, staring directly into the camera while the others faced away. Dr. Lowe became obsessed. She compared it to hundreds of other Depression-era photos, but found nothing similar. The exposure was perfect. There should have been no reason for a double image. Yet when she traced the light direction and shadows, everything aligned, except for that one small figure. Locals told her it must be Sarah Hollis, the youngest, but the county's death register listed only 3 children, Ruth, Caleb, and a stillborn. No Sarah, no trace of her birth, no grave, no mention in census records. It was as if the child in the photograph had never existed. When Dr. Lowe returned to the site months later, she reported something strange. The house had partially collapsed, and the mantel where the photo once rested was gone. She dug through debris and found nothing but a handful of small bones beneath the hearthstone, bones far too small to belong to an adult. She sent them to a Richmond lab for testing. A week later, the bones vanished in transit. No record of delivery, no tracking slip. Dr. Lowe's notes ended abruptly. Her colleagues said she withdrew from the university soon after, claiming she was being followed. Her final entry in her research journal. Read only this. There was a 4th child. They hid her, or buried her, to protect the rest. But from what? No one ever saw Dr. Lowe again. She left her office one night, locked the door, and never returned. The photograph, too, disappeared from county storage that same week. Some say the child in the picture was never born at all. Others believe she never died. By the 1980s, the Hollis story had bled into every corner of Smith County folklore. No longer just a local tale, but a dark stain in Virginia's oral history. Professors, journalists, and amateur ghost hunters all came searching for answers, but the truth, as always, lived in the silences. Among the courthouse records long thought destroyed, one clerk eventually found a single surviving birth ledger from 1936. In the faded handwriting of the county registrar were 2 entries. One for Warren E. Hollis, listed as head of household, and another directly beneath it. Etta M. Hollis, relation, same. No husband, no father, just the same name, copied twice. A line scrawled beside it read, "Children unregistered, by request." That note should never have existed. The state required all births to be recorded after 1925. But the Hollises had been shielded, somehow, perhaps by the same Reverend Coates who'd visited their home only once. Some said he'd promised to keep their secret, in exchange for silence about his own visits there, long after his wife's passing. Others said the Reverend's sudden illness and death in 1942 was not of natural cause. There were darker rumors still, that Etta was not Warren's sister at all, but his daughter. That she'd been claimed after his wife died, raised apart, then returned when she was of age. It was whispered in half voices at diners and Sunday gatherings, how the bloodlines in those mountains had twisted into something unholy, something the community refused to acknowledge. One family near Saltville claimed descent from the Hollises, though they never said it outright. Their children bore certain resemblances: pale eyes, a strange gait, faces too similar to one another. They lived reclusively, avoided cameras, and never spoke of the past. In 1987, an anonymous envelope was mailed to the county museum. Inside was a Polaroid photo of a grave marker deep in the woods. It read simply, "E.H., 1938, forgive me." No one ever found that grave. And though the forest has long since swallowed the old Hollis land, people still swear the soil there feels warm to the touch, even in winter. But maybe warmth isn't always life. Maybe it's something trying to rise again. By the turn of the century, the Hollis name had become folklore, a whispered cautionary tale told to keep children from wandering the ridges after dark. But for those who study the darker corners of Appalachian history, the story remains something heavier, more tragic, and far too human. Every version begins the same way. A man and woman, bound by both blood and loneliness, retreating into the hills to hide from the world. What began as shame became survival, and what began as survival turned into secrecy so deep it poisoned generations. By the time their children were born, the line between protection and punishment had disappeared. Locals still speak of a feeling near the old Hollis property, an unease that settles on the skin like humidity. Some say they hear a baby's cry carried through the fog. Others claim to see lights moving through the trees, slow and rhythmic, as if someone were still pacing the halls of a house long gone. Hunters refuse to enter after dusk. The earth there doesn't echo footsteps, they say. It absorbs them. In 2003, a hiker reportedly stumbled upon a rusted locket near the remains of a collapsed chimney. Inside was a photograph, the same one found decades earlier. But this time, the sixth figure, the small child, was gone. The space where it once appeared was nothing but white blur, like the emulsion had burned away. That locket sits in the county archives today, though most clerks refuse to touch it. A faint brown stain covers its hinge, not rust, not dirt, something else. No one knows where the Hollis bloodline went. Some believe it died with that final generation. Others, in whispers, say it didn't. They point to the quiet families still tucked into those mountain valleys. The ones with identical eyes, the same pale hair, the same habit of keeping to themselves. The shame of the Hollises became their legacy, not because they were monsters, but because they were human in a place that allowed no imperfection, no deviation, no sin left unpunished. And maybe that's why their story lingers, not as a haunting, but as a warning, because in Virginia's hills, some names die, and some refuse to be buried.